Hi, I'm Karla Lee with Voice4Kids. Thank you for joining me for another episode. And today we're on podcast 7 talking about your child's behaviour after separation. Voice4Kids, the raw, real truth of co-parenting through your child's eyes. I'm your host, Karla Lee, and it's time to hear their voice. Welcome to the Voice4Kids podcast. Hey there, Karla Lee here, Voice4Kids podcast number 7. So now we're talking about your child's behaviour after separation. So we all know behaviours of children, teenagers, can be difficult. Anyway, I've even been there myself. I've still got a teenager now, a young adult as well, but we've all been there. We know it's difficult. It's not easy to raise children. But when you have the emotional trauma of a divorce on top of that, it can just go sometimes to another level. Yes, some kids retreat back, they're quiet, but some rebel. And that was me. So for me, I remember just lashing out, just being angry, frustrated. I was 9, so I was more, in primary school. Obviously at the time, I just misbehaving in class, being kicked out, not wanting to pay attention to what the teacher was saying, back-chatting. I was annoyed, I was angry, I was frustrated. And I remember thinking to myself, I just hate being here, I hate my life, I hate what I'm going through, why is this happening to me? So this is just some of the thoughts as a 9-year-old. And then you're dealing on top of that with bullying and just, typical school, just problems, Everyone has problems in school just with different, boys and just teasing and just different things like that. We all go through it. Doesn't matter if you're in a popular group or not the popular group, you can still go through stuff. But I remember, going into high school and it was just difficult. My behaviour was just always rebellious, always had an attitude, just didn't want to listen to what anyone had to say. I just wanted to go to the party. I just wanted to muck around. I just wasn't listening in class. I think the teachers probably thought, gosh, it'd be easier if this one just wasn't here right now. And, easier that she just went somewhere else, because I was always misbehaving. I wasn't listening. I wasn't engaging. I was totally in another world. And that's what can happen when our minds as children are not clear and they're cluttered, and we're just dealing with all these different, emotional things that haven't been dealt with in the back of our heads. So for me, I remember, especially when I was entering into high school and I was getting to around the year 8, year 9 stage, when you're around, the 15, 16, and, you have parties and you got things you can go to, and then, there's discos and all these things. And I'd just be just doing silly stuff and, can I stay at my friend's house and just stay there for the night? But really I had a plan. All us teenagers with stupidity have a plan, and we think our plan's really good, and it's actually not. And we just go and, get our friend's older brother to go and get some cheaper, we used to call it passion pop from the bottle, and drink all this stuff and be sick before we've even arrived at the school disco and stupid things like that. We just do just silly stuff. And I remember, just with smoking and things like that, and going to my friend's house and just, getting her dad's cigarettes from her dad's boot, the Winfield Reds, the worst ones ever. But they were there and they were free, so we just took them out of his boot. He used to hide them under the lining of his boot, get them out, and we'd hide in the back of her dad's shed and have that. And by the time I was going home, I was reeking of cigarette, and I'd race home and have a quick shower and put all my clothes in the washing. And I think my dad just thought, wow, this is great. She's home already. She's had a shower. She's done a load of washing. There's a reason why I done a load of washing. There's a reason why I had an early shower. And my behaviour in class was just so reactive to things. I just do anything. Sometimes, you do it to get attention, really. Sometimes I find kids who go through a lot of rejection, they'll just suddenly flip the opposite way and do things to get attention. So acting out, being rude, misbehaving in class, just causing havoc. I'd have friends in class that, they were good students until they probably hung out with me, and I'd just lead them down the wrong way, or let's do this, let's do that, I dare you to do this, dare you to do that. I think I spent most of my time, half the time in the school corridors, where you're kicked out. And Miss Andrews, we just, first I'd be sent to the corner of the room, and I'd put my nose in the corner, and then because I was still disruptive in the corner, I'd be sent outside class, and then I'd leave the classroom. I remember leaving the classroom and going to my friend's place, or friend's classroom, and just finding my friend's classroom and going, oh, there's my friend, and I'd be slowly tapping on the door and having a talk to my friend and trying to wave through the window until that teacher would come and that teacher would see me and shoo me away. And, behaviour. It's just one thing that is difficult enough when you have children, and it's even more difficult, I think, when they're dealing with emotions and dealing with things that are on top of all that, And so that was kind of how it was for me. I just glided through my teenage years, somehow got away with a lot of stuff that I shouldn't have. And I just did it in a way that was like so unhealthy, so much trauma. A lot of communication wasn't there. As I've talked about communication, how important it is. I think I had nothing good to say sometimes. I was a happy kid in many ways, and a lot of people got along with me, and, I loved mucking around, having a fun time and having a joke. I mean, all that stuff was me naturally. I still have to do that to today. But underlying issues were always there, and that made my behaviour, I would say that teachers would probably happily say, she's got a bit of an attitude. Or I remember going to parent-teacher night, and I used to think, oh, gosh, if my dad goes to parent-teacher night, I'm going to be in so much trouble, because I know that everything the teacher's going to say is not going to be good. And I begged my mum, oh, Mum, can you come to parent-teacher night? Because I know if you go, Dad won't even want to go because you're there. But I thought, well, at least my mum, she'll laugh off half the things, I'm sure. And she did, thank God. But, I think what I want you to remember is, their world has been ripped apart. The child's world has been ripped apart. So you've got to expect that behaviour is going to be different at times. There are some kids that can go through divorce and, can handle it in certain ways, but there's usually underlying stuff that happens. And if there's no communication and nothing's been talked about, it then becomes as I said before, like it gets brushed under the carpet, it just grows more and more and more, and they hold it in, as I said, if you're not talking to them about it, and the behaviour can be the reaction of no communication. Okay, so this is the important part I'm trying to say. They can react because there's no talking. So I think for me, that was the main thing. My outward behaviour was because there was no communication. I mentioned in the podcast number 6, where parents need to communicate, their feelings to their child. If you're not doing that and the children are shutting off, well, sometimes then when they feel like they're being shut down and you're not understanding, the reaction can be the behaviour. And that's exactly how it was for me. And you have to sometimes expect the unexpected. You might get a phone call and from the school, or you might get, like some parents will have situations maybe where the police has turned up and different things, and they'll say that this has happened. Your child's done this. We've caught your child doing this, or this behaviour was happening here in class. And at the end of the day, you're just going to have to be present. You have to be a present parent, because you never know what you might face, and that might be your awakening, your alarm bell, your light bulb moment of like, hey, what's going on here? My child never would have done this before. I don't understand why this is happening. Let me just think about this for a minute. Why would my child be doing this now? I'm telling you, if you've never had any communication since your divorce and you've never talked about things and you've seen behaviour happening since then, that is what the issue is. That is what the issue is. And you need to go back to that root issue and you need to talk about, what's been going on there. What's been going on? What's led to this? What led you to that? Why did you do this? Who are you hanging around with? What's going on here? And they will be a little bit rebellious at first because they're thinking, well, you haven't been there for me all this time, but this friend has. As I talked to you earlier in a podcast about who are they hanging around. If you don't know who your children are hanging around and you are not having communication with your kids in general, even about the separation, in an open line of communication, and then they're hanging out with kids that are unhealthy for them, and then suddenly you come in and say, no, you're not hanging around with that person anymore, they're bad news, they are going to react. Trust me, they will react. They will react because they're thinking, who are you to tell me? Who are you to tell me that I can't hang out with this person? Why do you care? They've been there for me all this time. You have to remember, this is what I've said before, they will be the person that they lean on. They're going to lean on these people that are there for them if you're not. And so it's really important that you're careful of the conversations and the open doors of communication happening all the time so they're not leaning on the wrong people. And, your kids, sometimes they can be recluse, they can be backchatting, they can have tantrums, outward bursts, all these things can happen. But you have to see the bigger picture, okay? You've got to see the bigger picture. Because if you just keep focusing on the tantrum, and if they're little and they're having tantrums, those little tantrums that they're having, lying on the ground and kicking their legs and arms and screaming, and when dad's leaving, he's coming over to drop the kids back off and then he's crying because dad's leaving the house. Their emotions, because they don't know how to communicate to you that they don't want dad to leave. They want dad to stay. Or if it's mum leaving, they don't know how to communicate that. They don't know how to communicate that. And sometimes it's just by them crying that they're communicating. And you need to, get on the floor or sit down with them and hug them and say, I understand. Are you sad? Are you hurting? You've got to obviously talk in a child's language to the age that they are. Why are you sad? Do you want to talk? Do you miss dad? Yes. Okay, let's talk about that. Should we do something nice for dad? You have to work with their emotions. With teenagers, obviously it's different. They're not going to put up with any rubbish. They're not going to let you just, act like it's all good and it's not. You're going to have to sit down and have regular catch-ups. You might even have to do that once a week just to catch up with them to find out, how they're feeling, is there anything you can help them with? Is there anything they don't understand and you could explain to them better? Because sometimes you haven't explained clearly what's happened and they've still got questions. But if you're not asking what that question is, they're going to think to themselves, well, does mum and dad really care to ask me? Do they really want to know what's going on? So it's important that you at least have the conversations continually. And, let them feel like they have some control, especially older kids. Like, let them feel like they've got control in the way of coming forward and talking to you and that they do have a say. So, like, their behaviour can be bad sometimes because obviously the world's been ripped apart. They're in two different houses now and, give them some decisions, give them some choices like, okay, you're now, living over here in this house. This is your second home. Do you want to help me decorate the room? Like, would you like to choose this? What colour would you like me to help you paint it? Do you like a theme? Like, sometimes things like this can help the children feel like they're being included in decisions, then things aren't just being made without them. Even when it comes to their sports and different things, would you still like me to take you to sport, or would you like mum to now take you, or are you okay that we share? Like, just a little bit of inclusiveness, because a lot of the times children can feel like they're out of control, but when you feel like you give them a little bit of control, it helps them feel like they're still part of the family. Because remember, when divorce happens and it's a family breakdown, it's a family breakdown. Okay? Did you hear? It's a family breakdown. It's not a parent breakdown, okay? It's not a co-parent breakdown. It's not a mum and dad breakdown. It's called family breakdown for a reason, because the family has been broken, okay? So give your children that little bit of opportunity to actually say something or, somehow get involved and have some decisions and be part of that. It actually helps the kids feel like they're just being included, not just shut out and disregarded, because that can actually happen, So, as I said, see beyond the behaviour. See beyond the behaviour. Don't judge them for it. Look, we've all been there. We've all been teenagers. We've all had rebellious attitudes, okay? And we have to forgive, obviously, in that situation, and understand that, as I said, there's an underlying situation probably, and that you really need to, at least look into that. Don't just disregard and say, oh, this is all about behaviour. Because as I said before, if you don't tell the teacher that this is going on, that you're separated, and the teacher suddenly sees this behaviour, your child will be typecast as, oh, this is just a naughty kid in the school. This kid's just unbelievable. But if the teacher doesn't even know that it's suddenly been a family breakdown, they're going to think that. But if you're giving them a little bit of information, you're giving them information for them to understand that this has just happened, it'll help them kind of at least think, maybe they need a bit of counselling. Maybe I can, as a teacher, I'm going to sit down and talk with them. You might even know of a teacher in the school that your child really gets along with well. Might not be their main teacher. It could be a totally different teacher in the school. That's not necessarily one of their class teachers if they're in high school. That could be a teacher that could really be a good outlet for them. Like, could sit down and have some time with them and be a bit of an outlet when they're in school and they're going through a hard time, that they can sit with that teacher and have a conversation. It's just opening the communication lines, because as a parent you might find it's not easy to talk to your kids sometimes. Kids don't always want to open up to you. They might open up to an auntie or an uncle more. And if that's the case, I highly recommend. I know for me personally, one of my aunties was brilliant for me. My auntie Glenda was such a great support, and so was my uncle Merv. But she was, just a great person with a very soft, gentle heart. She'd sit with me and just talk about things, and she'd have understanding. She'd never judge me. She'd let me say whatever I wanted, whatever feelings or emotions I had. She'd just listen. She had compassion, no judgment. And that, I remember, really, really helped me, because my mum wasn't strongly in my life anymore, that female figure. As I said, I saw her every second weekend, and I saw her, throughout the week here and there, but it wasn't like I had that strong female figure. And she was just a great person, and she had a very different personality to my mum, okay? So my mum was a little bit more highly strung, you could say, a little bit more tense at times. And my auntie Glenda was very calm, very relaxed personality. And so I could engage with her very simply, and I built such a strong relationship with her. I knew I could say anything. Anything I wanted to say, I knew there'd be no judgment on it, and she'd just listen. And that was a really good thing, and that helped give me a lot of structure. And then her husband, which was my Uncle Merv, which is actually my biological dad's brother, and he pretty much raised me as well. And he was a great male figure for me. Really good, compassionate, understanding, always listening. Do you need to talk to me? I'm always here for you. Always telling me. Always making sure I knew that he was there for me, and other aunties and uncles that come around me as well. But it was really good for me, because I knew I had somewhere to lie my head or lean on, so to speak. There was a comfort there for me. And I think, when we don't talk to the kids, kids will eventually mask the issue. Okay, they'll get to the stage where, I think that's what I did for a long time. I acted like there was no issue. I went through high school, I went through all these problems, but I was masking what the issue really was. That's why I said I didn't really get to a point, the pinnacle point of so much of my life exploding was at 17. But going up till 17, I just kind of hid a lot of the stuff I was going through. As I said, I talked to my auntie and that a bit, but at school, I didn't want anyone to know that there was a problem. I never wanted my friends to know that I was going through stuff. I didn't know them to know that how I felt, because it wasn't a popular thing to talk about. So that's what I'm saying. When you haven't got the communication open at home, well, you're not necessarily going to always talk about it at school. It's not a popular thing to talk about. And that's where you can get involved in the drugs and the alcohol and gangs, and girls can get involved in relationships, and they get involved in early pregnancy. There's all these behaviour things that happen as a reflection of nothing being happening, in a communication way in the home. Like there's been no communication, there's been nothing happening. It's all just been cemented. It's all just been covered over. We'll just mask all this. We'll act like it didn't happen, and the kids will go forward and they'll be okay. And the kids will think, yeah, okay, well, we're not talking about it, so I'll just get on with life and I won't deal with that. But eventually, it just comes up. In some way, it'll come up in the wrong way. And a lot of kids, I think at times can feel abandoned, abandoned by their parents. And they can feel that abandonment because the parents have just not connected with them. And then when their behaviour's bad and the parents are angry at them and yelling at them, and then the kids are thinking, oh, yeah, well, this will happen because of, what you guys did to us and our family. They could be thinking that, but they're not saying it to you. But then they're copying all this flack from you about their behaviour, and there's actually a root issue, as I said, it hasn't been dealt with. They can just feel like they're abandoned by you emotionally because you've just kind of shut them down. Now you're just going off with them because of their behaviour, but you've never dealt with, as I said, stuff that went way back. And, there's another side of abandonment that happens for kids, and this can be children that are abandoned by one parent. So I know this happens for kids where separation and divorce happens and the parents separate, and then one parent totally abandons the family. I mean, just leaves. Up, pack bag, gone. Totally disassociates himself with the family, acts like they never had a family before, and off they go. And this can be devastating to many children. Many children have gone through this. And this is where I say the family support is so important. Aunties stepping up. If it's a mother that's got up and walked away, auntie stepping up, close friends, the lady stepping up, grandmother stepping up and filling that gap of that mother. Same for the dads. Uncles and close friends, grandfathers stepping up and filling that gap. You have to fill that gap because they need that male figure and they need the female figure. God would not have created male if it wasn't necessary. He wouldn't create a female if it wasn't necessary. There are parts of a female that a man cannot fulfill. There are parts of a man that a woman cannot fulfill. Different traits, different qualities that they bring to a child's life. That's why it's important that we look at co-parenting in a way of understanding that this is actually helping your child's growth. When you totally abandon your child, and if you're in a situation where you have walked away from your family and you just left your children and just thought, I've gone through all this and gone through that, and she said this about me, and I'm better off just leaving and never going back. I think one day you'll regret it. I really believe one day you'll regret it because you just walked out on your child's life, and really what you've taken is half of them away. Half of them has just been abandoned. And that's why I do say to parents things like, defame the parent, you defame the child. If you're talking bad about the other parent, you're talking bad about that child. That child starts to feel bad. Oh, mum says this about dad. Is that thing must be in me too? Or dad says this about mum. Is that thing must be in me too? That's why I say, the communication and how you talk to your children about the other parent is really important. What you say and how you say it. But when it comes to abandonment, this is really a sad situation that can happen to children when one parent just decides to up and go. You really need to get people in your world to rally around your children and be that support and fill those gaps. It's really important because they're going to feel the abandonment. They're going to be angry. They're going to be hurt. They're going to be sad. But over time, when these same people are stepping in and stepping in and stepping in, that child will look back and go, this is what happened to me, but, my uncle, he just stepped in. From day dot, he stepped in. As a little girl, I remember he stepped in and he said this and he said that, and no matter what, no matter how angry I was, he still was always there for me. And that's what they'll say. They'll always remember that parent that was, or auntie and uncle, grandparent that was still there. The parent that stayed, the parent that didn't abandon them, they'll remember it. But obviously when it comes to parental alienation, that's another thing. Some parents get pushed out, and that'll be another podcast, but they get pushed out and they can't even see their child. And sometimes it's due to false allegations, it's things that have been said against them that aren't true. And the parent that's doing that, I believe the repercussions will fall back on them eventually when it's all false. If it's all false and what you're saying is false, it'll fall back on you, because the child will turn around and find out the truth. And the bitterness and the anger that they'll have towards the parent that's told all these lies all these years, and they've lost all these years with that other parent, they'll just shut you down and they'll go to the other parent. I've seen this happen many times. So and you wonder, but I raised you all this time and I was telling you the truth and this is actually what happened. How can you act like this? Look at your behavior, how you're treating me. Sorry, but that's the behavior due to what you've done as a lie all this time has now fallen on you. There's a saying, that the sword will end up falling on yourself. You'll dig a hole sometimes for the other parent to fall in, but trust me, that hole that you're digging will be the hole that you end up in. It will be, because if you build your relationship with your child on lies about the other parent, eventually it comes to light. Children aren't silly. Children know they're just not silly. Never think that you're more clever, because that child ends up becoming a teenager. That child ends up becoming an adult. So you think because you're older, you're wiser, they will come up to the same level as you as one day, and they'll have that maturity, they'll have that wisdom, they'll have that knowledge, and they'll think, I don't know if that was actually a fact. I might need to go and speak to the other parent, ask a few questions. Trust me, it'll fall on you. So it's really important that you and your behavior and how you act even around your children is always done with, honesty. Be reliable, be trustworthy, be transparent. Don't talk bad about the other parent, because you will start to see a behavior in your child when you change. The way I should say it is, when you talk bad about the other parent and you start downloading, your child's behavior will even change, because you'll see them be a reactive child. So the minute you ever bring up, just say you're talking bad about the mother, the child's behavior every time you bring up the mother, the more you're talking about how bad this mother is, there'll be a reactive behavior from that child. Like, they won't want to hear it. They'll be like, I'm sick of dad talking about mum like this. I'm just over it. Or they'll be like, yeah, I know, I hate her too. And they'll get on the bandwagon. And you at first will like that. You at first will like that behavior, because you want them to hate the other parent. If that's your intention, you actually want them to hate the other parent. But this actually can be very detrimental to you. Very detrimental to you. So I highly recommend you don't do it. Never alienate. Never alienate the parent from your child's life. It's a repercussion that will totally destroy you. It will actually, put you in a position where you'll just be like, I don't know. I just can't tell you that it's going to work out well when it's probably going to be an absolute disaster for you in the end. It's going to be to the point that it's actually going to damage you so much that it's going to end up being, very, very harmful. Very, very harmful. So in saying all that, behaviours, yes, obviously in kids, we know they can have behaviour issues. They can be angry, they can be sad, they can be frustrated, they can be bitter. All these things, obviously, layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. They can get more heightened when you don't talk through your problems. So sit down with your kids, take the time to ask them how they're feeling, take the time to ask them would they like to, even catch up once a week just to have a talk about things, do a special thing, like take them to do something they really love to do, and after you might just get a bite to eat and just say, hey, how you going? Just want to check in on you, to see how things are. Just show them that you want to take that time for them, because kids, obviously, behaviour, it's a hard thing to deal with sometimes, but when you're not dealing with the root issue of things and you're letting those things just slide and think, I don't want to upset my kids and talk about my separation, divorce. I don't want to do that because I'm already upset myself. And so I think that they seem all right. They seem pretty good. But are they? Do you really know? Maybe not. Okay, so check in. So grieving with your child is the next podcast. Okay, grieving with your child. That'll be podcast number 8. And this one I find is like similar to when I said sharing your emotions with your child, but it's not a long podcast, that one. It's a shorter one, but it's an important one that you ride this wave together. Go through the motions together, journey through this together so you can come out on top, and maybe it can even be done in a quicker way. It just depends on, the time that you put into it. Obviously your children might be shut off at first, but it's worth actually taking the time to talk to your kids about their emotions and what they could be grieving, and just the steps that you can actually go through with them to actually come out the other end. It's always about coming out the other end, right? That's always about coming out the other end. So thank you so much for joining me on this podcast about child's behaviour after separation. This is podcast 7. And as I said, podcast 8 is something that I really think could help you through a few steps with grieving with your children. So I'm Karla Lee from Voice4Kids. Thank you so much for joining me, friend, and I'll see you on the next podcast.